Welcome to STEMinism Club.
Hey kids, ever wondered how our tongues tell our brains what soda tastes like? Well, there's the sweetness from the sugar in the soda, but also that fizzy feeling. What is that? Well, that's carbonation, and that means that little bubbles of carbon dioxide, aka CO2, are inside the liquid soda. That fizzy feeling are those bubbles popping on your tongue, which is a sensation of touch. But did you know that we can taste the gas inside those bubbles? Well, a team of scientists figured out how. If we take a closer look at the tongue, we can see that there are all these little bumps. Inside those bumps, there are a bunch of taste buds, and inside those taste buds, there are taste cells. Each of these cells can taste one of the 5 basic tastes: salty, sweet, bitter, umami, and sour. When a certain taste cell sees the type of food that it can taste, it sends a message to the brain that it's tasting that type of food. For example, if we look at this sweet cell, when it sees sugar, it sends a message to the brain that there's sugar on the tongue and you perceive the taste as sweet. But if there's something on the tongue, like a lemon, then this sweet receptor won't tell your brain that there's anything on your tongue, and instead the sour receptor will do it. So how does carbonation fit into that? The researchers who did this study didn't know how we can taste carbonation, but we know that we can. And after doing this study, they found out that CO2 is able to hijack our taste system for sour foods such as lemons or vinegar. So, how did they find this out? Well, there were 3 main experiments the scientists did to identify the particular messenger that tells your brain that CO2 is on your tongue. First, they tested if mice who couldn't taste each of the 5 basic tastes could still notice the presence of CO2 in their mouth. For example, this one can't taste salty, this one can't taste sweet, this one can't taste bitter, this one can't taste umami, and this one can't taste sour. All of the mice were able to taste the carbonation except for the ones who couldn't taste sour. So concluding from that, sour receptors are important in distinguishing the taste of CO2. Building from that, the researchers focused on just cells that can taste sour things. They compared the insides of working and non-working sour-tasting cells, kind of like a spot-the-difference puzzle. The thought process the researchers had was, whatever made CO2 detection possible would be more prevalent in working cells than the non-working ones. They ended up finding a special protein that sits on the outside of the cell that was much less common in the non-working cell. This protein is called CAR4, so that is probably our mystery messenger that we're looking for. To check that this protein really is what allows us to detect CO2, the scientists kept the sour cells working, but removed CAR4. If CAR4 is our mystery messenger, what do you think the scientists would expect to happen? That's right, they wouldn't be able to detect CO2, and that's exactly what happened. Additionally, even though the sour cells were missing CAR4, they were still able to detect sour things like lemons. So why does this have to do with sour-tasting cells? Well, CAR4 happens to have a reaction to CO2 that makes it give away lots of acid, and sour-tasting cells look for acid in their environments. So even though CO2 itself isn't sour, it causes CAR4 to produce acid, which makes your sour taste cells tell your brain that you're tasting something sour. And that's how CO2 hijacks your sour-tasting system. So why does this matter? Well, this experiment is one of many that show how our sensory systems can be used in interesting ways to sense things we might not explicitly realize. In other words, even though carbonation isn't technically one of the 5 basic tastes, this experiment highlights how our body can distinguish it in a unique way. Additionally, now that we know more about how we perceive carbonation, it could be possible to create fake carbonation that uses no bubbles at all. This could be helpful for people who find it hard to drink carbonated beverages due to medical conditions where it can be painful or make their condition worse. While fake carbonation doesn't exist now, it could in the future. So it's important to understand how scientific discovery happens to make something like that a reality.